sensitivity is 72.5%, and rifampicin detection sensitivity is almost 97%, and specificity is 98%, which is very high number of sensitivity and specificity. The second study shows that from pulmonary specimen in low prevalence populations, the sensitivity of the smear positive, culture positive is 98%, and the specificity is 100%. In smear negative, culture positive, the sensitivity of gene expert is 72%. But the problem is the extrapulmonary samples, when the sample is not sputum. So this technology is mainly designed for sputum only. But when extrapulmonary samples were performed, the sensitivity from culture positive is 77%. So there's a drop in sensitivity. And the specificity is 98%. And also, the WHO announced that the rifampicin resistant from gene expert as surrogate marker for multi-drug resistant, because rifampicin resistant as monoresistant, not very frequent, from 5 to 15 of them, and from 80 to 95 of rifampicin resistant strains are also resistant to INH, and as a result, it can be used as surrogate marker for multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. So just an overall summary of expert technology. The sample is easy to perform with minimal training, only 1 day training. The cross-contamination is almost nil. Multiple MTB and rifampicin resistant detection within almost 2 hours, and high performance in extrapulmonary samples, and no significant cross reaction with non-tuberculous mycobacteria. This year, in March 2017, the same company launched the new technology, and it is called the Next Generation Expert Ultra Assay, and it is straight away recommended by the WHO. This technology is mainly designed for African countries, India, some countries where have the high tuberculosis cases. So the difference between this technology, the next generation, and the old generation, this generation, the new one, showed significantly better performance, increased sensitivity compared to the current expert cartridge for the detection of tuberculosis complex. A new innovation including a larger DNA reaction chamber in the cartridge, and it will bring the bacterial load down 10-fold, which almost amplify or detect 10 DNA copies. There is no technology nowadays amplify or detect the organism from almost 10 copies. The previous technology detects 131 CFU per ml. So this is a huge performance for this technology. But better accuracy doesn't always translate into better outcomes. Let's assume we only have this technology in tuberculosis laboratory. Absolutely, it's not enough, because this technology detects almost 10 bacilli, and many extrapulmonary samples like cerebrospinal fluids have less than this number of bacilli. This is one. Two, when we'd like to follow up, or when the physician follows up the patient, he needs a culture in order to check whether the bacilli are viable or non-viable. But this technology shows the identification regardless the viability and non-viability of the bacilli. So we can't put the culture on the desk and use the gene expert technology. The culture is considered the gold standard for detection of tuberculosis. Use of culture increases the number of TB cases found over smear alone. For MTB complex, fewer organisms needed to positive culture than for positive AFP smear, almost one bacilli. Culture used for species identification, drug susceptibility testing, and genotyping. And culture also used to monitor patient response to treatment, as I just mentioned. We have two types of culture for tuberculosis diagnosis. First, we have solid culture, the well-known culture, It is called LJ medium, and also we have 7H11 medium. And we have liquid cultures. They are widely used, all of them. But the one in the middle, the Bactic midget technology, is mostly used in Ministry of Health of Saudi Arabia and non-MOH hospitals. The solid culture takes 6 to 8 weeks, and I worked with some sputum samples. It takes almost 11 weeks to give a result. So it takes a long time, and they are used for confirmatory tests nowadays. The negative report issued at up to 42 days for liquid culture, but more likely to be positive in 10 to 12 days. Also, this technology do the drug susceptibility testing for the first line drug to detect the resistant or sensitive to streptomycin, isoniazid, rifampicin, ethambutol, and pyrazinamide. But again, these technologies are not enough to cover all services in microbacteriology laboratories. We have many problems with TB patients. Some of the TB patients have resistance against first-line drugs. Some of them, maybe they have resistance against second-line drugs. And these technologies take long time, as you've seen. The midget technology, culture, it takes from 10 to 12 days if there is bacteria in the tube, and sometimes takes 42 days. The PCR, yes, it gives results within 2 hours, but it's not enough to get all information about the disease. So, one of the well-known German companies launched this technology. This technology can be used after culture for low-income countries. It's basically identify Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex, whether MTBM complex or non-tuberculous mycobacteria. It takes 10 minutes to give the result. It is cheaper than Gene Expert. Just one drop from the culture, and you will get the result in 10 minutes. We did a study in our laboratory to measure the sensitivity and specificity of the TB check MPT64 test, and the sensitivity was quite high, and as well the specificity. Line probe assay. Actually, this assay just introduced to the tuberculosis reference laboratory in Ministry of Health. Basically, it is genotyping assay where the DNA is extracted, amplified, and hybridized into a nitrocellulose membrane, and as you see. Another technology, the same technology, genotyping, identifies non-tuberculous mycobacteria or mycobacterium other than tuberculosis. Actually, we have a defect nowadays to detect these forms of mycobacteria. We have no data in our records determining the type of non-tuberculous mycobacteria. That's why this technology is just introduced to the MOH. Again, we have a major problem nowadays, which is to identify the second-line drugs. When the patient or when the bacteria resists the first line drug, the second line is not determined for many years. So we still don't know whether we have XDR in the country or not. So this technology, the genotyping technology, was introduced to solve this problem. But the disadvantages of this technology requires highly trained personnel, requires dedicated laboratory space and equipment, but it's expensive, but not as expensive as Gene Expert. At the end, actually, the diagnosis is not the main issue to control tuberculosis. It is a complete cycle, starting from recording the cases, rapid triage test, rapid molecular techniques, culture sequencing information, shorter drug regimen, adhere monitoring tools, and finally, electronic notification and tracking the cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Abdulwahab. I think we may have maybe 5 minutes for the question for the first speaker and also for the second speaker before we go to the third speaker. Anybody have any question?
Maybe I will have asked.
Okay, in that case, we're going to go to our third speaker. Thank you, Dr. Abdulwahab.
Thank you.
Our third speaker will be Dr. Samira Al-Jahani. She obtained an MD degree from King Saud University. She started her residency training program at McMaster University, Ontario, Canada, and obtained Canadian and American Board of Medical Microbiology 2006-2011, respectively. Dr. Al-Jahani received 1-year fellowship in molecular virology diagnostic at Toronto Public Health Lab. Upon retaining, Dr. Al-Jahani appointed consultant of medical microbiology and section head of the microbiology in December 2007. 2012, Dr. Al-Jahani appointed as Associate Dean, College of Science and Health Professions, King Saud bin Abdulaziz University of Health Science. Dr. Al-Jahani interested in advancement of patient diagnostic, and she published also several of articles in peer-reviewed journals.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Abdulrahman, for the invitation and for the introduction. And thank you for the organizing committee for asking me to present today. I'm Dr. Al-Jahani. I'm the director of microbiology lab at King Abdulaziz Medical City at National Guard. So today I'll be talking about sepsis diagnostic, and I think somebody who's in charge of a huge lab like the one in National Guard, this is our daily routine major issue that we need to be on top of it. And I will mainly talk about introducing the rapid assay for diagnosing sepsis, because the time frame is so critical, and the advances in molecular microbiology have fostered the development of newer techniques and potential diagnoses for sepsis that need to be rapid and reliable. Molecular assay can be completed within few hours and can be more sensitive than routine blood cultures, specifically for culture-negative infective endocarditis. In addition, the significant increase in the workload related to the bloodstream infection for clinical lab could potentially be offset by high-throughput molecular assay coupled with automation. I'll start with this case that happened in Ramadan of 2009. I always present this case because it's really heartbreaking for me, and I still remember the kid. So he was an 8-year-old boy. He brought to the emergency room last day of Ramadan at around 7:30 p.m., just after their family completed their breakfast. And the main complaint was fever and leg pain. He was healthy. He had no problem before. He felt unwell that day around 3 p.m., and the family waited until after breakfast. Upon arrival to the emergency room, he looked very sick, and he was started with antibiotic, and blood culture was drawn. At that time, he was started on ceftriaxone and vancomycin. Unfortunately, his condition very rapidly deteriorated. Despite he was on antibiotic, even before the culture came back to be positive, within 2 hours from incubating it in the lab. Around 11:45 p.m., he desat despite being on oxygen. Then his blood pressure started to drop. He intubated, mechanically ventilated, and labeled as sepsis. After inotropic support, unfortunately, he went into asystole, and all trial for resuscitating him failed, and he passed away 3 a.m. Eid day. It was so sad story. I still remember it. So the blood culture was taken 9 p.m. After 1.5 hours, 2 hours, incubation was positive. Reported to the emergency room as gram-positive cocci in clusters, and he was on the vanco added because of the gram-positive cocci in clusters. In 24 hours, the identification of Staphylococcus aureus was obtained. and within 2 days, we figure out that it is MRSA BVL positive, which is high virulence strain. So sepsis diagnosis, and I focus always, can we be more faster than this? Can we do better? It is very challenging in healthcare setting, and I know that I'm a microbiologist, I'm not a frontliner, but I have to support all the effort to be able to diagnose sepsis. And nowadays, I think people not interested only in identification of the organism. Still, they need a quicker way of getting antibiotic susceptibility testing, especially in the era with a lot of multi-drug resistant organisms. So every year, sepsis claim more victims. It's about 20 to 30 million people throughout the world. It is more faster, and the number is higher than breast cancer, prostate cancer, HIV/AIDS combined. The number of deaths caused by sepsis increasing due to aging of the population, invasive diagnostic technique, and increased resistance to antibiotics. Sepsis is the primary cause of mortality in the ICU, and it affects more than 20 million people throughout the world each year. So what do we have for that? The expert, they have one kit, which is the MRSA blood culture, and I have that kit handy. I have a very few number of cartilage handy just in case, especially after that incident, just in case if we have a positive blood culture for gram-positive cocci cluster from the ICU. The MALDI-TOF MS, the FISH, the fluorescent in situ hybridization technique, multiplex PCR, and there's so many different multiplex available. And nowadays, people talking about the last 3 instruments, the Nanosphere, BioFire, and Accelerate. And in each microbiology conference, you will be hearing a lot about those 3 techniques very frequently. The expert, this is the huge Infinity. We have the Infinity 80 modules in my lab. Actually, we are using it a lot for so many different assays, which include the MRSA, Staph aureus, positive blood culture, that will give us the result within 1 hour from culture positive. So you have to have a positive culture first. And the microarray, the film array, which is the BioFire. This is the Vitek MS. We have the Vitek MS, which is the MALDI-TOF technique. The advantage of this technique that you can get the result, the identification within few minutes. And I think our lab supervisor is here, Bassam, yeah, so he's here. So it's just few minutes, but the disadvantage that it's still expensive, and you have to have a positive blood culture growing to be able to use the machine. So many labs evaluating and validating, having the test to be used directly from the blood culture. And I think we are in that range to evaluate it directly from blood culture without waiting for the culture. Again, it has a very extensive database, and I think each few years they are upgrading their software. So I think the latest software, it has a lot of mycobacterium, so you can use it for mycobacterium, and it has a lot of yeast and fungal database. Accelerate phenotype, and I think me and the supervisor, we are so much interested to have this assay in our lab. It's still waiting for the Saudi FDA approval. The good thing that it can give you the identification within few minutes, but the antibiotic susceptibility testing, which what we are interested in, within 7 hours. The disadvantage that it is expensive assay, and for this machine, it will take 1 sample. So if you want it for, let's say, 3 or 4 patients at the time, you have to wait to finish. So I'm sure they are working to improve that, because we need it to be used for more than 1 patient at a given time. Recently received the FDA approval, and it's widely being used in the US nowadays. The film array, there's a lot of film array and microarray available for sepsis diagnostics. I'm talking about BioFire here today because I evaluated in my lab, and we got the contract for the machine, the big machine, the torch, to be installed in our lab within the coming few weeks. And always when you try to introduce any new assay in your lab, you have to think of it is a platform and what else you can use in that platform. And it's better for you, especially with the lab space, to use one platform that has multiple assays that you need in your lab to fit and to use the space wisely. The nice thing about BioFire that it has a lot of multiplex PCR for respiratory viruses, bacterial pneumonia, meningitis, and GI, in addition to the sepsis panel. All the panels are FDA cleared and approved. It will give you the result within 1 hour, very minimal hand-on technique. And this is the torch, where it's 12 modules together. So you can use this 12 module. The nice thing, you can use each module. It's exactly like the Gene Expert. Each module, you can use it for a different assay. You don't have to use it all at the same panel. And it will give you the result within 1 hour, even the multiplexed respiratory viruses. I focused here on the sepsis panel or the blood culture panel, and there's many gram-positive, gram-negative, and yeast cartilage, and it has some antimicrobial resistant gene. The disadvantage is still you have to wait for the growth on the culture bottle before using this assay. Very simple technique. They have this, like you add. This is like the stage. You just hook it to the system, and you add the control from one end and the sample from the other end. Then you put it in the machine, and it will run and give you the result within 1 hour. Why BioFire? BioFire, by the way, it's an old system. It's not something new. It started in the US, and they have a very nice, huge panel that need the federal approval to have it, which is for biological hazardous material. And the biothreat pathogen, they have 12 targets. It's listed here, all the agents of bioterrorism, which include the anthraces, botulinum, Coxiella burnetii, the Ebola, the Zaire form, and tularemia. So it has a lot of agents of bioterrorism, and not anyone can use it. It has to be a federal or more governmental agencies, which is here maybe the Ministry of Health. There is a film array NGDBT assay, which is mainly for Ebola Zaire form. It is under emergency use authorization by lab designed by the DOD. And recently, the company just released this information for us. They didn't circulate, but they are planning for a kit for MERS-CoV panel, which is on-demand assay that will take 1 hour. We are so much interested in that and waiting for it to be released. They said at either the last quarter of 2017 or first quarter of 2018. Talking about the BioFire, I just give you some history about the JPA-IDS system. On September 2003, which is so many years ago, BioFire was awarded this system, which is Joint Biological Agent Identification and Diagnostic System contract. This is a program created to provide rapid positive identification and diagnostic confirmation of biological warfare agents and other pathogens of operational concern for 4 branches in the US military: the US Army, US Navy, US Air Force, and US Marine Corps. And at that time, it was very nice. It's called the Razor, the system by then called Razor. Very compact, very easy to carry, and very handy that they use it for molecular detection of agent bioterrorism. And they run 12 BCR, real-time BCR at one given time. And then they start to marketing it for the patient diagnostic around in 2015. PNA fish technology. There is two different fish technology, the US, which is the BathDex, and the German, the MIACOM. The fish technology, it's a rapid molecular-based identification of positive blood culture. Again, you have to have a positive blood culture bottle. Then after the gram staining, you use which panel you need. So for gram positive, they have a different panel than gram negative. And again, it's based on what you have in the gram stain. You should select the panel. The database is just compact, and it's very specific for the commonest gram positive and gram negative organism. It is relatively expensive, but not like the BioFire nor the GeneXpert. It's about 150 Saudi riyal per test, and if you add the control prices, it will add for. And they have a new kit, which is still for research use only for fungal pathogen, mainly Candida, and very extensive database for the Candida. The Verigene, the nanosphere, we did evaluate it in our lab, I think, last year. It is a multiplex platform. It has different kit for respiratory virus, for GI, and blood culture. And still, you need to have a positive blood culture. We have a relatively good result with this assay, but not with the respiratory one. It's just the blood culture. It's relatively fine. And their database, they have the extensive gene for carbapenem resistance, which is similar to the one it has at the GeneXpert CarbaR. So in conclusion, in the past few years, new rapid diagnostic microbiology tests become game changer for a healthcare provider. And every year we have a newer diagnostic test shown to improve the patient care. And when the results are communicated faster, some of them can also identify antibiotic-resistant bacteria. While microbiologists across the world want to implement a new technology, there are some barriers, mainly the cost, because in most of the time it's very expensive. Sometimes the instrument is so large that the lab space is not enough, and it's considered to be very challenging for the lab personnel. The complexity of some of the tests may be an issue for low-volume labs. And finally, development of rapid tests has outpaced the clinical awareness, so education is the critical for ensuring the uptake of the new tests. And I'm sure all labs have facing this problem where people requesting so many assays at the same time without waiting and evaluating the clinical outcome. And remember, there is always a complicated issue facing laboratories using molecular techniques, which is reimbursement and overall costs of healthcare. Lab need to ensure that they are performing the right test for the right patient at the right time. And this is by Dr. Patel from my clinic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Samira, for the good timing and also for the interesting lecture. And I would like to say to you that you are the first female speaker in our society, since I've been in the society, really. Okay, maybe the previous ones. And Dr. Fatma will be the second also. I'll leave just only 5 minutes for the question.